guys will know I'm the queen of slash and spread, and this is another slash and spread project. What's up, KDvers? Welcome back to another tutorial. I am going to be attempting to create this design that looks like there is a collar inserted on the front of the bodice and that wraps around to the back neckline. I remember seeing this on Pinterest. I knew I wanted to try it. It just looked so cool, so interesting. This is something you could put on a blouse, on a blazer, on a jumpsuit, on a tailored like office style dress. However, in this video I'm going to be showing it on a simple button up top. This I plan to probably dress up with a pair of smart trousers or jeans depending on where I'm going. So I'm going to show you guys how to create the sewing patterns from a basic bodice, and then I'm going to stitch everything together, show you what it fits like on the body. If I make any mistakes, share that as usual. So if you recreate this for yourself, you have all the information you need to actually follow through and arrive at your own outcome. If you do enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up. I'm so excited for this project because I love creative pattern making. You guys will know I'm the queen of slash and spread, and this is another slash and spread project, so I'm excited to see how this will turn out. And if you are, let's get into this video. I have split this video into chapters so it's easy for you guys to follow and come back to in the future if you want to recreate this project for yourself. But these are the materials I'm going to be working with. My base pattern is my basic bodice. This you can grab off the King Dave shop. It goes from a UK 6 to 16 and it's just the top half of your body from the shoulder down to about the hips. This I'm going to be modifying for my design in this video, so I'm going to leave a link down below if you want to grab one for yourself. My fabric of choice for this project is this fine woven wool. This I just have a meter of. That was enough to make this blouse, and I have some interfacing I'm going to be adding to the front panels where the buttons are going to be and the facing as well. I just found random sets of buttons that complement each other in terms of color and shape, and that's what I'm going to be using for this project. Now I've gone off camera and traced off the top half of my body's pattern. I've traced it off to the waist area and added seam allowance around the pattern. I have also dropped the arm curve by 2 centimeters or roughly 1 inch and reshaped the center back edge along the waistline, so when it's on my body it's smooth and it doesn't have a weird bulge. Now that I have my front and back basic patterns traced off with seam allowance and everything added, I'm going to go ahead to modify it. The main work in this project is on the front of the blouse, and I'm going to be working on the front in this particular clip. Now I'm going ahead to extend my center front edge by 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters. I'm just adding a 1 cm seam allowance around my pattern. After doing that, that extension is going to become my button stand because I want to be able to add button and buttonholes on the front of this blouse. And once I was done adding that, marking all the annotations, I went ahead to add seam allowance around those areas. Now the next thing I'm doing here is I'm connecting the top of my waist dart to my neckline edge, and this particular line I am going to be slashing, spreading and adding the feature that this blouse has. Now I'm cutting from the top or the shoulder edge down to the waistline, and I'm going to cut away the actual dart width itself. After cutting that out, I am going to place some paper underneath so it holds my panels together, and I'm going to pivot the waist dart to the shoulder. Essentially, I'm just joining the bottom edges of that front pattern, and then I'm marking how much I am spreading this. It ended up being about 2.5 inches, which is roughly 6 centimeters, and I'm going to be spreading it even more to the right side by 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters. Once I was on spreading it in that direction and everything was connected at the bottom, I'm just going in to sellotape the patterns to the paper that is underneath so it becomes a whole piece all joined together. This I'm going to tape down carefully on the inside and any other points where there is a disconnect. After doing it along this edge, I'm going to go to the top portion of this piece, and then I'm going to measure around my back neckline. Mine ended up being around 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and I'm going to be extending the shoulder point upwards by whatever the back neckline is. So mine was 10 cm 4 inches, and I'm going to mark that in that upward direction like so. And I'm going to fold both pattern edges together. So that excess that we added, I'm going to fold it inwards. And once I have it folded like that, I'm going to ensure that it is really folded through the middle of the extension. And then I'm going to fold the extension that I've added with the extra paper in this direction, and roughly with my hand just draw in the center back edge. This is going to help me mirror that same line on the other side of that fold, because the hope is you want to have a whole collar piece that sits on the center back. With my tracing wheel, I transferred the line, open up the paper, and I'm going to draw in the line like so. Mine ended up being curved. You can have it straight if you want to. In all honesty, I found that when I stitched it up and it was curved, it made a little bit of a weird shape that personally I don't mind, but if you don't want, you can just make that center back edge straight and it would still look good. After adding all of the seam allowance around the shoulder, the center back edge, transferring any other important notches, I'm going ahead to cut out excess paper around my front pattern. And these are the two main patterns that you need for this design: the front, which is on the left, and then the back pattern, which is on the right. The back you don't need to make any changes to, as long as you have your seam allowance and your dot and everything that you would need to stitch it together. It's all done for the back. The next thing I'm going to work on is the front facing, because I want a very clean finish on the front of the pattern. I'm going to go to the center front edge and mark 3 inches, which is around 8 centimeters, and then I'm going to square that across just around the front edge like so, and then dip it down towards the side as it goes to the middle of the pattern, and curve that back onto the side seam at a 2-inch or 5 cm point along the side. Basically, I'm making a shape that is high on the center front and it kind of like curves down to the bottom of the arm curve. This is going to become the front facing. This is going to allow me to finish the collar, the arm curve, and the neckline very nicely, rather than just have anything that could take away from the beauty of this top. Now I'm going to get a separate piece of paper and trace off that pattern for the facing. So the front edges, the neckline, the bottom curve, the arm curve itself, transfer notches that will help me when I cut this pattern onto fabric. So it makes construction a lot easier because I can just match notches that are meant to be together. After tracing it off, adding the seam allowance, writing down all necessary annotations, this is what the front facing look like, and this is the last pattern piece that I created for this project. Using the sewing patterns, I'm going to go ahead and cut my blouse, and my fabric of choice, as I mentioned earlier on, is this really fine wool. This I had more than 1 meter, but by the time I was done cutting everything, I ended up using just about 1 meter for this project. I'm going to pin it down onto my fabric, respecting the grain lines, and I'm going to be cutting a pair of each pattern. So I have a pair, one for my left, one for my right, for the front, for the back, and then for my facings as well. Once I have these cuts, I'm going to go back in and make sure I cut my notches, because it just makes assembling pieces a lot easier when you have notches to kind of tell you where pieces should match and where they should meet. It takes the guesswork out of assembly of clothing. Once I was done cutting my notches using this small scissors, I know I have all the pieces ready for this project, and I'm going to go ahead to actually start stitching everything together. Before I stitch them together, I do want to reinforce the facing and where the button stand is going to be on the front. So I'm going to take the facing and I'm going to be ironing some interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric. I have made the mistake in the past to use the wrong type of interfacing for a particular project, so make sure you find a facing that has a similar weight to your fabric of choice. This is a nice medium weight interfacing, and it's a woven interfacing as well. So this I've ironed as well on the center front edges where my button stands and buttons are going to be. And once I have that cut done, I know I'm ready to actually join everything together. And I'm going to be starting with the back, and the first thing I'm going to do is to transfer my dart points to my back pieces. This I'm doing with a pin and chalk. I'm going to pierce a pin through the dart point and mark on the wrong side of the fabric the exact point of where the dart ends. I'll do this for both sides, and because I've already notched the bottom of this piece from my pattern, I know how wide my dart is along the waistline. So I'm going to do this for the left hand side and the right hand side, pin those darts away, and I'm going to put right sides together of my back pieces because I want to connect them on the center back. This I'm going to be pinning first and taking to my machine, sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I plan to overlock it later on. You could also use bias tape or do a zigzag stitch if you don't have an overlocker or a serger. That works just as fine and just as well, but I just want to be able to have a beautiful finish on the inside of my piece. So this I'm going to overlock after I'm done stitching it up together. After doing this, I took my piece to the iron, pressed all of my seams nice and open, and this is what the back of my top looks like. The next thing I'm going to work on after this is the arm curve. Because the back doesn't have facing, I'm going to be using bias tape to finish that back arm curve. And this I'm going to do in 2 steps. So I'm going to open my bias and stitch it along the edge like so on a 1 cm seam allowance, or you can do this on a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, however wide your bias tape is. After stitching it like this, I'm then going to go back to the top of this seam and roll the bias tape twice to cover the raw edge and finish that part of the garment. This is a very simple and easy way that you can use bias tape to finish necklines, armholes, sleeve hems, dress hems. It just gives you a really nice, clean, beautiful finish, and if it's done correctly, like, it looks even better on the inside and on the outside as well. I gave it a nice press, and I'm going to set the back piece to the side so I can work on the front. I am putting right sides together of my front facings to my main front pieces, and this I'm going to do for both sides of my front, and I'm going to stitch the facing and the main piece together along the arm curve and along the neckline up until the point where the shoulder seam is. You want to stop at that point, so remember to notch it from your pattern. After doing this, I am actually going to go back in with a small scissors and cut tiny snips along the curved seams. What that's going to help your piece do is when you turn it inside out, it's going to help the stitch, that fold or that curve, just fold over a lot easier. So when you go in with an iron, it just relaxes a lot easier because from the snips being made, it helps the fabric to stretch a lot easier. Just try not to cut your seam. So I went ahead, pressed it after turning it inside out. I will also overlock the center front edge and the bottom edge of my facing, so I have that, done and out of the way. Now this is what the top edge looks like. So you want to leave that edge open because that's actually going to sit into the back neckline. Now here I'm joining the center back edges of my collar extension with right sides facing each other. So I'm doing this for the facing panels and I'm doing this for the actual main body panels. The facing panels is the one that has the interfacing on the wrong side of the fabric, whereas the main body just has interfacing only on when the buttons are going to be. So this I'm sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance because that's how much seam allowance I added on my pattern. And once I was done doing that, I took it to my machine and I gave it a press to relax all of the stitching. So this is what the blouse is looking like so far. It came together really, really nicely. But to make the iconic detail that this piece has, I am going to go in and put a pin where the dart for the waist used to be, and I'm going to fold in the shoulder or the collar extension so you have a clean fold from that center back to the waistline. I'm just adding pins at this point, so when I take this in my machine to iron it, nothing moves or nothing goes in the way that I don't want. So I'm going to do this for both ends, and you should end up with a fold or a pleat that goes from one side all the way to the other side if everything was kind of done or constructed correctly. So I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm just essentially going to iron that fold really well. I want that fold to be very obvious because it's the main feature of this blouse. After giving my piece a good press, this is what the front is looking like. You can already see that the detail is coming together really nicely. Oh, how cool is this? It's like it now has a collar, even though I didn't have to do a collar piece separate. I just think that's so cool. Now I'm going to be connecting the front to the back, and I folded in the extended collar from the front. I've just folded it in inwards, and I'm going to be joining the side seams and then the shoulder across the back neck to the other side, one continuous stitch. Here's a closer look of what it looks like. I say this is the trickiest part of this project because you want to be able to catch the edge of the front in that back neckline, in that back shoulder seam, so everything is connected and it looks smooth and seamless when you actually put it on. So I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to start from the shoulder edges, stitch until I get to the edge where the back neckline is. That point right there is the point that I say if you have to do it a couple of times before you get it right, don't worry, there's nothing wrong, there's no shame. It's just a little bit tricky to do, but if done correctly, it looks really cool. After stitching it together, I'm going ahead to overlock all those seams on the inside, and this is what the top is looking like. It just looks so satisfying. Like, I put this in the mannequin and my husband was just like, wow, you have never done anything like this before. And I don't know, I'm glad I tried it out and it's coming together nicely. For the button stand, I'm folding it inwards by 3 centimeters and I'm going to be stitching it along the edge where my overlock seam or my overlock is. It will allow me to have a folded edge where I'm going to put my button and my buttonholes depending on the side. So I've folded and pinned for the left side and for the right side on the front, and I'm going to be sewing on the inside of my front panels, stitching from the top all the way to the bottom, trying to get a straight stitch because this is going to be visible on the right side of the garment. And after doing that, I went in to fold and stitch the hemline of the top. This, you could do a blind hem if you don't want your stitch to be visible like I have done mine. That's another option you could consider, so that way you don't see a stitch that goes across the bottom of your piece. But once I was on hemming the hem of the top, I'm going ahead to add my buttons and buttonholes. Off camera, I marked where I want my buttonholes to be, and I'm just going to do this on my machine. I have a separate tutorial where I actually shared how to use a domestic machine. This is a Brother LS14 to actually stitch in buttonholes, and I recommend you space the buttons in such a way that it looks visually pleasing and it's secured when the buttons are actually like passed through the buttonholes. After I was done doing the buttonholes, I'm going ahead to stitch in the buttons, and I just chose 3 different buttons, but they complemented each other really well because they had tones of gold and cream, which kind of gave a unique feel to the top. But after the buttons were all stitched in, this is what the finished top looked like. I am just so pleased with the outcome. This is something that I know would look really cool on a blazer or as a top half of a dress or of a jumpsuit, because it just adds a very elegant twist to a classic cut. This is basically just a button-up blouse, but the fact that it has a collar that just goes around the neck and then down into the body so seamlessly looks really cool. But I hope you guys enjoyed this project. If you did, do give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to tag me on social media at Kim Dave Designs if you do recreate this for yourself. And until next time, have a good morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are. Bye.